After Babylon had been taken, the march of Darius himself against the Scythians took place, for now that Asia was flourishing in respect of population and large sums were being gathered in as revenue, Darius formed the desire to take vengeance upon the Scythians, because they had first invaded the Median land and had overcome in fight those who opposed them, and thus they had been the beginners of wrong. The Scythians, in truth, as I have before said, had ruled over Upper Asia for 28 years, for they had invaded Asia in their pursuit of the Cimmerians, and they had deposed the Medes from their rule, who had rule over Asia before the Scythians came. Now when the Scythians had been absent from their own land for 28 years, as they were returning to it after that interval of time, they were met by a contest not less severe than that which they had had with the Medes, since they found an army of no mean size opposing them. For the wives of the Scythians, because their husbands were absent from them for a long time, had associated with the slaves. Now the Scythians put out the eyes of all their slaves because of the milk which they drink, and they do as follows. They take blowpipes of bone just like flutes, and these they insert into the vagina of the mare and blow with their mouths, and others milk while they blow, and they say that they do this because the veins of the mare are thus filled, being blown out, and so the udder is let down. When they had drawn the milk, they pour it into wooden vessels hollowed out, and they set the blind slaves in order above the vessels and agitate the milk. Then that which comes to the top they skim off, considering it the more valuable part, whereas they esteem that which settles down to be less good than the other. For this reason the Scythians put out the eyes of all whom they catch, for they are not tillers of the soil but nomads. From these their slaves then, I say, and from their wives, had been born and bred up a generation of young men, who having learnt the manner of their birth set themselves to oppose the Scythians as they were returning from the Medes. And first they cut off their land by digging a broad trench extending from the Tauric mountains to the Maeotian lake, at the point where this is broadest. Then afterwards, when the Scythians attempted to invade the land, they took up a position against them and fought, and as they fought many times, and the Scythians were not able to get any advantage in the fighting, one of them said, "What a thing is this that we are doing, Scythians? We are fighting against our own slaves, and we are not only becoming fewer in number ourselves by being slain in battle, but also we are killing them, and so we shall have fewer to rule over in future. Now therefore to me it seems good that we leave spears and bows, and that each one take his horse whip, and so go up close to them. For so long as they saw us with arms in our hands, they thought themselves equal to us and of equal birth, but when they shall see that we have whips instead of arms, they will perceive that they are our slaves, and having acknowledged this, they will not await our onset." When they heard this, the Scythians proceeded to do that which he said, and the others, being panic-stricken by that which was done, forgot their fighting and fled. Thus the Scythians had ruled over Asia, and in such manner, when they were driven out again by the Medes, they had returned to their own land. For this Darius wished to take vengeance upon them, and was gathering together an army to go against them. Now the Scythians say that their nation is the youngest of all nations, and that this came to pass as follows. The first man who ever existed in this region, which then was desert, was one named Targetaus, and of this Targetaus they say, though I do not believe it for my part, however they say the parents were Zeus, and the daughter of the river Borysthenes. Targetaus, they report, was produced from some such origin as this, and of him were begotten 3 sons, Lapoxes and Apoxes, and the youngest Colaxae. In the reign of these there came down from heaven certain things wrought of gold, a plough, a yoke, a battle-axe, and a cup, and fell in the Scythian land. And first the eldest saw, and came near them, desiring to take them, but the gold blazed with fire when he approached it. Then when he had gone away from it, the second approached, and again it did the same thing. These then the gold repelled by blazing with fire. But when the third and youngest came up to it, the flame was quenched, and he carried them to his own house. The elder brothers then, acknowledging the significance of this thing, delivered the whole of the kingly power to the youngest. From Lixopais, they say, are descended those Scythians who are called the race of the Orchatai, from the middle brother Apoxae, those who are called Katiaroi and Traspians, and from the youngest of them the royal tribe who are called Paralatai, and the whole together are called, they say, Skolatoi, after the name of their king. But the Hellenes, gave them the name of Scythians. Thus the Scythians say they were produced, and from the time of their origin, that is to say, from the first King Targetaus to the passing over of Darius against them, they say that there is a period of 1,000 years and no more. Now this sacred gold is guarded by the kings with the utmost care, and they visit it every year with solemn sacrifices of propitiation. Moreover, if anyone goes to sleep while watching in the open air over this gold during the festival, the Scythians say that he does not live out the year, and there is given him for this so much land as he shall ride round himself on his horse in one day. Now as the land was large, Colaxes, they say, established 3 kingdoms for his sons, and of these he made one larger than the rest, and in this the gold is kept. But as to the upper parts which lie on the north side of those who dwell above this land, they say one can neither see nor pass through any further, by reason of feathers which are poured down, for both the earth and the air are full of feathers, and this is that which shuts off the view. Thus say the Scythians about themselves and about the region above them. But the Hellenes who dwell about the Pontus say as follows: Heracles, driving the cattle of Geryones, came to this land, then desert, which the Scythians now inhabit, and Geryones, says the tale, dwelt away from the region of the Pontus, living in the island called by the Hellenes Erythea, near Gadara, which is outside the pillars of Heracles by the ocean. As to the ocean, they say indeed that it flows round the whole earth, beginning from the place of the sun rising, but they do not prove this by facts. From thence Heracles came to the land now called Scythia, and as a storm came upon him together with icy cold, he drew over him his lion's skin and went to sleep. Meanwhile the mares harnessed in his chariot disappeared by a miraculous chance, as they were feeding. Then when Heracles woke he sought for them, and having gone over the whole land, at last he came to the region which is called Hylaea, and there he found in a cave a kind of twofold creature formed by the union of a maiden and a serpent, whose upper parts from the buttocks upwards were those of a woman, but her lower parts were those of a snake. Having seen her and marveled at her, he asked her then whether she had seen any mares straying anywhere, and she said that she had them herself, and would not give them up until he lay with her. And Heracles lay with her on condition of receiving them. She then tried to put off the giving back of the mares, desiring to have Heracles with her as long as possible, while he on the other hand desired to get the mares and depart. And at last she gave them back and said, These mares when they came hither I saved for thee, and thou didst give me reward for saving them, for I have by thee 3 sons. Tell me then, what must I do with these when they shall be grown to manhood, whether I shall settle them here, for over this land I have power alone, or send them away to thee? She thus asked of him, and he, they say, replied, When thou seest that the boys are grown to men, do this, and thou shalt not fail of doing right. Whichsoever of them thou seest able to stretch this bow as I do now, and to be girded with this girdle, him cause to be the settler of this land. But whosoever of them fails in the deeds which I enjoin, send him forth out of the land. And if thou shalt do thus, thou wilt both have delight thyself, and perform that which has been enjoined to thee. Upon this he drew one of his bows, for up to that time Heracles, they say, was wont to carry 2, and showed her the girdle. And then he delivered to her both the bow and the girdle, which had at the end of its clasp a golden cup, and having given them he departed. She then, when her sons had been born and had grown to be men, gave them names first, calling one of them Agathyrsos, and the next Gelenos, and the youngest Scythes. Then, bearing in mind the charge given to her, she did that which was enjoined. And 2 of her sons, Agathyrsos and Gelenos, not having proved themselves able to attain to the task set before them, departed from the land, being cast out by her who bore them. But Scythes, the youngest of them, performed the task and remained in the land, and from Scythes the son of Heracles were descended. They say the succeeding kings of the Scythians, Scythians, and they say moreover that it is by reason of the cup that the Scythians still even to this day wear cups attached to their girdles, and this alone his mother contrived for Scythes. Such is the story told by the Hellenes, who dwell about the Pontus. There is, however, also another story, which is as follows, and to this I am most inclined myself. It is to the effect that the nomad Scythians dwelling in Asia, being hard pressed in war by the Massagatai, left their abode and crossing the river Araxes came towards the Cimmerian land, for the land which now is occupied by the Scythians is said to have been in former times the land of the Cimmerians. And the Cimmerians, when the Scythians were coming against them, took counsel together, seeing that a great host was coming to fight against them, and it proved that their opinions were divided, both opinions being vehemently maintained, but the better being that of their kings, for the opinion of the people was that it was necessary to depart, and that they ought not to run the risk of fighting against so many, but that of the kings was to fight for their land with those who came against them. And as neither the people were willing by means to agree to the counsel of the kings, nor the kings to that of the people planned to depart without fighting and to deliver up the land to the invaders, while the kings resolved to die and to be laid in their own land, and not to flee with the mass of the people, considering the many goods of fortune which they had enjoyed, and the many evils which it might be supposed would come upon them, if they fled from their native land. Having resolved upon this, they parted into 2 bodies, and making their numbers equal, they fought with one another, and when these had all been killed by one another's hands, then the people of the Cimmerians buried them by the bank of the river Tirus, where their burial place is still to be seen, and having buried them, then they made their way out from the land, and the Scythians, when they came upon it, found the land deserted of its inhabitants. And there are at the present time in the land of Scythia Cimmerian walls, and a Cimmerian ferry, and there is also a region which is called Cimmeria, and the so-called Cimmerian Bosphorus. It is known, moreover, that the Cimmerians, in their flight to Asia from the Scythians, also made a settlement on that peninsula, on which now stands the Hellenic city of Sinope. And it is known too that the Scythians pursued them and invaded the land of Media, having missed their way. For while the Cimmerians kept ever along by the sea in their flight, the Scythians pursued them, keeping Caucasus on their right hand, until at last they invaded Media, directing their course inland. This then, which has been told, is another story, and it is common both to Hellenes and barbarians. Aristeas, however, the son of Caestrobios, a man of Proconnesos, said in the verses which he composed that he came to the land of the Macedonians, being possessed by Phoebus, and that beyond the Macedonians dwelt Arimaspians, a one-eyed race, and beyond these the gold-guarding Griffins, and beyond them the Hyperboreans, extending as far as the sea, and all these except the Hyperboreans, beginning with the Arimaspians, were continually making war on their neighbors, and the Macedonians were gradually driven out of their country by the Arimaspians, and the Scythians by the Macedonians. And so the Cimmerians, who dwelt on the southern sea, being pressed by the Scythians, left their land. Thus neither does he agree in regard to this land with the report of the Scythians. As to Aristeas, who composed this, I have said already whence he was, and I will tell also the tale which I heard about him in Proconnesos and Cyzicus. They say that Aristeas, who was in birth inferior to none of the citizens, entered into a fuller's shop in Proconnesos and there died, and the fuller closed his workshop and went away to report the matter to those who were related to the dead man. And when the news had been spread abroad about the city that Aristeas was dead, a man of Cyzicus, who had come from the town of Artak, entered into controversy with those who said so, and declared that he had met him going towards Cyzicus, and had spoken with him. And while he was vehement in dispute, those who were related to the dead man came to the fuller's shop with the things proper in order to take up the corpse for burial. And when the house was opened, Aristeas was not found there, either dead or alive. In the 7th year after this he appeared at Proconnesos and composed those verses which are now called by the Hellenes the Arimaspea, and having composed them he disappeared the 2nd time. So much is told by these cities, and what follows I know happened to the people of Metapontion in Italy 240 years after the 2nd disappearance of Aristeas, as I found by putting together the evidence at Proconnesos and Metapontion. The people of Metapontion say that Aristeas himself appeared in their land and bade them set up an altar of Apollo and place by its side a statue bearing the name of Aristeas of Proconnesos, for he told them that to their land alone of all the Italiotes 18 Apollo had come, and he who now was Aristeas was accompanying him, being then a raven when he accompanied the god. Having said this he disappeared, and the Metapontines say that they sent to Delphi and asked the god what the apparition of the man meant, and the Pythian prophetess bade them obey the command of the apparition, and told them that if they obeyed, it would be the better for them. They therefore accepted this answer and performed the commands, and there stands a statue now bearing the name of Aristeas close by the side of the altar dedicated to Apollo, and round it stand laurel trees, and the altar is set up in the marketplace. Let this suffice which has been said about Aristeas, now of the land about which this account has been begun. No one knows precisely what lies beyond it, for I am not able to hear of anyone who alleges that he knows as an eyewitness, and even Aristeas, the man of whom I was making mention just now, even he, I say, did not allege, although he was composing verse, that he went further than the Macedonians, but that which is beyond them he spoke of by hearsay, and reported that it was the Macedonians who said these things. So far, however, as we were able to arrive at certainty by hearsay, carrying inquiries as far as possible, all this shall be told, beginning with the trading station of the Borysthenites, for of the parts along the sea this is the central point of all Scythia. Beginning with this, the first regions are occupied by the Callipydae, who are Hellenic Scythians, and above these is another race, who are called Alizonians. These last and the Callipydae in all other respects have the same customs as the Scythians, but they both sow corn and use it as food, and also onions, leeks, lentils, and millet. Above the Alizonians dwell Scythians who till the ground, and these sow their corn not for food but to sell. Beyond them dwell the Neroi, and beyond the Neroi towards the north wind is a region without inhabitants as far as we know. These races are along the river Hypanis to the west of the Borysthenes, but after crossing the Borysthenes, first from the seacoast is Hylaea, and beyond this, as one goes up the river, dwell agricultural Scythians, whom the Hellenes who live upon the river Hypanis call Borysthenites, calling themselves at the same time citizens of Olbia. These agricultural Scythians occupy the region which extends eastwards for a distance of 3 days' journey, reaching to a river which is called Pantocapes, and northwards for a distance of 11 days' sail up the Borysthenes. Then immediately beyond these begins the desert and extends for a great distance, and on the other side of the desert dwell the Androphagoi, a race apart by themselves and having no connection with the Scythians. Beyond them begins a region which is really desert and has no race of men in it, as far as we know. The region which lies to the east of these agricultural Scythians, after one has crossed the river Pantocapes, is occupied by nomad Scythians, who neither sow anything nor plough the earth, and this whole region is bare of trees except Hylaea. These nomads occupy a country which extends to the river Geros, a distance of 14 days' journey eastwards. Then on the other side of the Geros we have those parts which are called the royal lands, and those Scythians who are the bravest and most numerous, and who esteem the other Scythians their slaves. These reach southwards to the Tauric land, and eastwards to the trench which those who were begotten of the blind slaves dug, and to the trading station which is called Kremnoi upon the Myosian lake, and some parts of their country reach to the river Tanais. Beyond the royal Scythians towards the north wind dwell the Melanchlaenoi, of a different race and not Scythian. The region beyond the Melanchlaenoi is marshy, and not inhabited by any so far as we know. After one has crossed the river Tanais, the country is no longer Scythia, but the first of the divisions belongs to the Sauromatai, who beginning at the corner of the Myosian lake occupy land extending towards the north wind 15 days' journey, and wholly bare of trees both cultivated and wild. Above these, holding the next division of land, dwell the Budinoi, who occupy a land wholly overgrown with forests consisting of all kinds of trees. Then beyond the Budinoi towards the north, first there is desert for 7 days' journey, and after the desert turning aside somewhat, more towards the east wind we come to land occupied by the Thysagetai, a numerous people and of separate race from the others. These live by hunting, and bordering upon them there are settled also in these same regions men who are called Erikai, who also live by hunting, which they practice in the following manner. The hunter climbs up a tree and lies in wait there for his game. Now trees are abundant in all this country, and each has a horse at hand which has been taught to lie down upon its belly in order that it may make itself low, and also a dog, and when He sees the wild animal from the tree, he first shoots his arrow and then mounts upon his horse and pursues it, and the dog seizes hold of it. Above these, in a direction towards the east, dwell other Scythians, who have revolted from the royal Scythians, and so have come to this region. As far as the country of these Scythians, the whole land which has been described is level plain and has a deep soil, but after this point it is stony and rugged. Then, when one has passed through a great extent of this rugged country, there dwell in the skirts of lofty mountains men who are said to be all bald-headed from their birth, male and female equally, and who have flat noses and large chins and speak a language of their own, using the Scythian manner of dress, and living on the produce of trees. The tree on the fruit of which they live is called the pontic tree, and it is about the size of a fig tree. This bears a fruit the size of a bean, containing a stone. When the fruit has ripened, they strain it through cloths, and there flows from it a thick black juice. And this juice which flows from it is called azkai. This they either lick up or drink mixed with milk, and from its lees, that is the solid part, they make cakes and use them for food. For they have not many cattle, since the pastures there are by no means good. Each man has his dwelling under a tree, in winter covering the tree all round with close white felt cloth, and in summer without it. These are injured by no men, for they are said to be sacred, and they possess no weapon of war. These are they also who decide the disputes rising among their neighbors, and besides this, whatever fugitive takes refuge with them is injured by no one, and they are called Argipaeans. Now, as far as these bald-headed men, there is abundantly clear information about the land and about the nations on this side of them, for not only do certain of the Scythians go to them, from whom it is not difficult to get information, but also some of the Hellenes, who are at the trading station of the Borysthenes and the other trading places of the Pontic coast, and those of the Scythians who go to them transact their business through 7 interpreters and in 7 different languages. So far as these, I say, the land is known. But concerning the region to the north of the bald-headed men, no one can speak with certainty, for lofty and impassable mountains divide it off, and no one passes over them. However, these bald-headed men say, though I do not believe it, that the mountains are inhabited by men with goats' feet, and that after one has passed beyond these, others are found who sleep through 6 months of the year. This I do not admit at all as true. However, the country to the east of the bald-headed men is known with certainty, being inhabited by the Isidonians, but that which lies beyond both the bald-headed men and the Isidonians towards the north wind is unknown, except so far as we know it from the accounts given by these nations which have just been mentioned. The Isidonians are said to have these customs. When a man's father is dead, all the relations bring cattle to the house, and then having slain them, and cut up the flesh, they cut up also the dead body of the father of their entertainer, and mixing all the flesh together they set forth a banquet. His skull, however, they strip of the flesh and clean it out and then gild it over, and after that they deal with it as a sacred thing and perform for the dead man great sacrifices every year. This each son does for his father, just as the Hellenes keep the day of memorial for the dead. In other respects, however, this race also is said to live righteously, and their women have equal rights with the men. These then also are known, but as to the region beyond them, it is the Isidonians who report that there are there one-eyed men and gold-guarding griffins, and the Scythians report this, having received it. From them, and from the Scythians, we, that is the rest of mankind, have got our belief, and we call them in Scythian language Arimaspians. For the Scythians call the number 1 Arima and the eye spot. This whole land which has been described is so exceedingly severe in climate that for 8 months of the year there is frost so hard as to be intolerable, and during these if you pour out water you will not be able to make mud, but only if you kindle a fire can you make it. And the sea is frozen and the whole of the Cimmerian Bosphorus, so that the Scythians who are settled within the trench make expeditions and drive their wagons over into the country of the Scythians. Thus it continues to be winter for 8 months, and even for the remaining 4 it is cold in those parts. This winter is distinguished in its character from all the winters which come in other parts of the world, for in it there is no rain to speak of at the usual season for rain, whereas in summer it rains continually, and thunder does not come at the time when it comes in other countries. but is very frequent in the summer, and if thunder comes in winter, it is marveled at as a prodigy. Just so, if an earthquake happens, whether in summer or in winter, it is accounted a prodigy in Scythia. Horses are able to endure this winter, but neither mules nor asses can endure it at all, whereas in other countries, horses, if they stand in frost, lose their limbs by mortification, while asses and mules endure it. I think also that it is for this reason that the hornless breed of oxen in that country have no horns growing, and there is a verse of Homer in the Odyssey supporting my opinion, which runs this: also the Libyan land, where the sheep very quickly grow horned, for it is rightly said that in hot regions the horns come quickly, whereas in extreme cold the animals either have no horns growing at all, or hardly any. In that land then this takes place on account of the cold, but, since my history proceeded from the first seeking occasions for digression, I feel wonder that in the whole land of Elis mules cannot be bred, though that region is not cold, nor is there any other evident cause. The Eleans themselves say that in consequence of some curse mules are not begotten in their land, but when the time approaches for the mares to conceive, they drive them out into the neighboring lands, and there in the land of their neighbors they admit to them the he-asses until the mares are pregnant, and then they drive them back. As to the feathers, of which the Scythians say that the air is full, and that by reason of them they are not able either to see or to pass through the further parts of the continent, the opinion which I have is this: in the parts beyond this land it snows continually, though less in summer than in winter, as might be supposed. Now whomsoever has seen close at hand snow falling thickly knows what I mean without further explanation, for the snow is like feathers, and on account of this wintry weather being such as I have said, the northern parts of this continent are uninhabitable. I think therefore that by the feathers the Scythians and those who dwell near them mean symbolically the snow. This then which has been said goes to the furthest extent of the accounts given about a Hyperborean people. The Scythians report nothing, nor do any of those who dwell in this region, unless it be the Macedonians, but in my opinion neither do these report anything, for if they did the Scythians also would report it, as they do about the one-eyed people. Hesiod, however, has spoken of Hyperboreans, and so also has Homer in the poem of the Epigonoi, at least if Homer was really the composer of that epic, but much more about them is reported by the people of Delos than by any others. For these say that sacred offerings bound up in wheat straw are carried from the land of the Hyperboreans and come to the Scythians, and then from the Scythians the neighboring nations in succession receive them and convey them westwards. Finally, as far as the Adriatic, thence they are sent forward towards the south, and the people of Dodona receive them first of all the Hellenes, and from these they come down to the Malian Gulf, and are passed over to Euboea, where city sends them on to city till they come to Charistos. After this, Andros is left out, for the Charistians are those who bring them to Tenos, and the Tenians to Delos. Thus they say that these sacred offerings come to Delos, but at first they say the Hyperboreans sent 2 maidens bearing the sacred offerings, whose names, say the Delians, were Hyperoche and Laodice, and with them for their protection the Hyperboreans sent 5 men of their nation to attend them, those namely who are now called Perpheres, and have great honours paid to them in Delos. Since, however, the Hyperboreans found that those who were sent away did not return back, they were troubled to think that it would always befall them to send out and not to receive back. And so they bore the offerings to the borders of their land bound up in wheat straw, and laid a charge upon their neighbours, bidding them send these forward from themselves to another nation. These things then, they say, come to Delos, being thus sent forward, and I know of my own knowledge that a thing is done which has resemblance to these offerings, namely that the women of Thrace and Paeonia, when they sacrifice to Artemis the queen, do not make their offerings without wheat straw. These I know do as I have said, and for those maidens from the Hyperboreans who died in Delos, both the girls and the boys, of the Delians cut off their hair, the former before marriage cut off a lock, and having wound it round a spindle lay it upon the tomb. Now the tomb is on the left hand as one goes into the temple of Artemis, and over it grows an olive tree. And all the boys of the Delians wind some of their hair about a green shoot of some tree, and they also place it upon the tomb. The maidens, I say, have this honour paid them by the dwellers in Delos, and the same people say that Arge and Opis also. being maidens, came to Delos, passing from the Hyperboreans by the same nations which have been mentioned even before Hyperosh and Laodike. These last, they say, came bearing for Eileithyia the tribute which they had laid upon themselves for the speedy birth, but Arge and Opis came with the divinities themselves, and other honours have been assigned to them by the people of Delos. For the women, they say, collect for them, naming them by their names in the hymn which Olin, a man of Lycia, composed in their honour. And both the natives of the other islands and the Ionians have learnt from them to sing hymns, naming Opis and Arge, and collecting. Now this Olin came from Lycia, and composed also the other ancient hymns, which are sung in Delos. And moreover they say that when the thighs of the victim are consumed upon the altar, the ashes of them are used to cast upon the grave of Opis and Arge. Now their grave is behind the temple of Artemis, turned towards the east, close to the banqueting hall of the Chians. Let this suffice which has been said of the Hyperboreans, for the tale of Abaris, who is reported to have been a Hyperborean, I do not tell, namely how he carried the arrow about all over the earth, eating no food. If, however, there are any Hyperboreans, it follows that there are also Hypenotians, and I laugh when I see that, though many before this have drawn maps of the earth, yet no one has set the matter forth in an intelligent way, seeing that they draw ocean flowing round the earth, which is circular exactly as if drawn with compasses, and they make Asia equal in size to Europe. In a few words I shall declare the size of each division, and of what nature it is as regards outline. The Persians inhabit Asia extending to the southern sea, which is called the Erythraean, and above these towards the north wind dwell the Medes, and above the Medes the Sasperians, and above the Sasperians the Colchians, extending to the northern sea, into which the river Phasis runs. These four nations inhabit from sea to sea. From them westwards 2 peninsulas stretch out from Asia into the sea, and these I will describe. The first peninsula on the one of its sides, that is the northern, stretches along beginning from the Phasis and extending to the sea, going along the Pontus and the Hellespont as far as Sigeon in the land of Troy. And on the southern side the same peninsula stretches from the Myrandrian Gulf, which lies near Phoenicia, in the direction of the sea, as far as the headland Triopian, and in this peninsula dwell 30 races of men. This, then, is one of the peninsulas, and the other, beginning from the land of the Persians, stretches along to the Erythraean Sea, including Persia, and next after it Assyria, and Arabia after Assyria, and this ends, or rather is commonly supposed to end, at the Arabian Gulf, into which Darius conducted a channel from the Nile. Now in the line stretching to Phoenicia from the land of the Persians, the land is broad, and the space abundant. But after Phoenicia this peninsula goes by the shore of our sea along Palestine, Syria, and Egypt where it ends, and in it there are 3 nations only. These are the parts of Asia which tend towards the west from the Persian land. But as to those which lie beyond the Persians, and Medes and Sasperians and Colchians towards the east and the sun rising, on one side the Erythraean Sea runs along by them, and on the north both the Caspian Sea and the river Araxes, which flows towards the rising sun, and Asia is inhabited as far as the Indian land. But from this onwards towards the east it becomes desert, nor can anyone say what manner of land it is. Such and so large is Asia, and Libya is included in the second peninsula, for after Egypt Libya succeeds at once. Now about Egypt, this peninsula is narrow, for from our sea to the Erythraean Sea is a distance there of 10 myriads of fathoms, which would amount to 1,000 furlongs, but after this narrow part, the portion of the peninsula which is called Libya is, as it chances, extremely broad. I wonder then at those who have parted off and divided the world into Libya, Asia, and Europe, since the difference between these is not small, for in length Europe extends along by both, while in breadth it is clear to me that it is beyond comparison larger, for Libya furnishes proofs about itself that it is surrounded by sea, except so much of it as borders upon Asia, and this fact was shown by Necos, king of the Egyptians, first of all those about whom we have knowledge. He, when he had ceased digging the channel 43, which goes through from the Nile to the Arabian Gulf, sent Phoenicians with ships, bidding them sail, and come back through the Pillars of Heracles to the northern sea, and so to Egypt. The Phoenicians therefore set forth from the Erythraean Sea and sailed through the southern sea, and when autumn came, they would put to shore and sow the land, wherever in Libya they might happen to be as they sailed. And then they waited for the harvest, and having reaped the corn they would sail on, so that after 2 years had elapsed, in the 3rd year they turned through the Pillars of Heracles and arrived again in Egypt. And they reported a thing which I cannot believe, but another man may, namely that in sailing round Libya they had the sun on their right hand. Thus was this country first known to be what it is, and after this it is the Carthaginians who make report of it. For as to Ctesippus the son of Thespis the Achaemenid, he did not sail round Libya though. He was sent for this very purpose, but was struck with fear by the length of the voyage and the desolate nature of the land, and so returned back and did not accomplish the task which his mother laid upon him. For this man had outraged a daughter of Zopyrus, the son of Megabizos, a virgin, and then when he was about to be impaled by order of King Xerxes for this offense, the mother of Sataspes, who was a sister of Darius, entreated for his life, saying that she would herself lay upon him a greater penalty than Xerxes, for he should be compelled, she said, to sail round Libya, until in sailing round it he came to the Arabian Gulf. So then Xerxes, having agreed upon these terms, Sataspes went to Egypt, and obtaining a ship and sailors from the Egyptians, he sailed to the Pillars of Heracles, and having sailed through them and turned the point of Libya, which is called the promontory of Solois, he sailed on towards the south. Then, after he had passed over much sea in many months, as there was needed ever more and more voyaging, he turned about and sailed back again to Egypt, and having come from thence into the presence of King Xerxes, he reported, saying that at the furthest point which he reached he was sailing by dwarfish people who used clothing made from the palm tree, and who, whenever they came to land with their ship, left their towns and fled away to the mountains. And they, he said, did no injury when they entered into the towns, but took food from them only. And the cause, he said, why he had not completely sailed round Libya, was that the ship could not advance any further, but stuck fast. Xerxes, however, did not believe that he was speaking the truth, and since he had not performed the appointed task, he impaled him, inflicting upon him the penalty pronounced before. A eunuch belonging to this Sataspes ran away to Samos as soon as he heard that his master was dead, carrying with him large sums of money. And of this a man of Samos took possession, whose name I know, but I purposely pass it over without mention, of Asia. The greater part was explored by Darius, who, desiring to know of the river Indus, which is a second river producing crocodiles of all the rivers in the world, to know, I say, of this river where it runs out into the sea, sent with ships, besides others whom he trusted to speak the truth, Scylax also, a man of Carianda. These, starting from the city of Kaspateros and the land of Pactiaik, sailed down the river towards the east, and the sun rising to the sea, and then sailing over the sea. Westwards they came in the 30th month to that place from whence the king of the Egyptians had sent out the Phoenicians of whom I spoke before, to sail round Libya. After these had made their voyage round the coast, Darius both subdued the Indians and made use of this sea. Thus Asia also, excepting the parts of it which are towards the rising sun, has been found to be similar to Libya. As to Europe, however, it is clearly not known by any, either as regards the parts which are towards the rising sun or those towards the north, whether it be surrounded by sea, but in length it is known to stretch along by both the other divisions. And I am not able to understand for what reason it is that to the earth, which is one, 3 different names are given derived from women, and why there were set as boundaries to divide it the river Nile of Egypt and the Phasis in Colchis, or as some say the Maeotian river Tanais and the Cimmerian ferry, nor can I learn who those persons were who made the boundaries, or for what reason they gave the names. Libya indeed is said by most of the Hellenes to have its name from Libya, a woman of that country, and Asia from the wife of Prometheus, but this last name is claimed by the Lydians, who say that Asia has been called after Aetius the son of Cotys the son of Manes, and not from Asia the wife of Prometheus, and from him too they say the Asian tribe in Sardis has its name. As to Europe, however, it is neither known by any man whether it is surrounded by sea, nor does it appear whence it got this name, or who he was who gave it, unless we shall say that the land received its name from Europa the Tyrian, and if so, it would appear that before this it was nameless like the rest. She, however, evidently belongs to Asia, and did not come to this land which is now called by the Hellenes Europe, but only from Phoenicia to Crete, and from Crete to Lycia. Let this suffice now which has been said about these matters, for we will adopt those which are commonly accepted of the accounts. Now the region of the Euxine upon which Darius was preparing to march has, apart from the Scythian race, the most ignorant nations within it of all lands, for we can neither put forward any nation of those who dwell within the region of Pontus as eminent in ability, nor do we know of any man of learning having arisen there, apart from the Scythian nation and Anaxarchus. By the Scythian race, one thing which is the most important of all human things has been found out more cleverly than by any other men of whom we know, but in other respects I have no great admiration for them, and that most important thing which they have discovered is such that none can escape again who has come to attack them, and if they do not desire to be found, it is not possible to catch them. For they who have neither cities founded nor walls built, but all carry their houses with them, and are mounted archers, living not by the plough but by cattle, and whose dwellings are upon cars, these assuredly are invincible and impossible to approach. This they have found out, seeing that their land is suitable to it, and at the same time the rivers are their allies, for first this land is plain land and is grassy and well watered, and then there are rivers flowing through it not much less in number than the channels in Egypt. Of these as many as are noteworthy and also can be navigated from the sea, I will name. There is Ister with 5 mouths, and after this Tyrus, Hypanis, Borysthenes, Pantocapes, Kypakairis, Geros and Tanais. These flow, as I shall now describe. The Ister, which is the greatest of all the rivers which we know, flows always with equal volume in summer and winter alike. It is the first towards the west of all the Scythian rivers, and it has become the greatest of all rivers, because other rivers flow into it, and these are they which make it great. 5 in number are those which flow through the Scythian land, namely that which the Scythians call Porata, and the Hellenes Pyretos, and besides this, Tierantos and Araros and Napares and Odessus. The first mentioned of these is a great river lying towards the east, and there it joins waters with the Ister. The second, Tierantos, is more to the west and smaller, and the Araros and Napares and Odessos flow into the Ister, going between these two. These are the native Scythian rivers which join to swell its stream, while from the Agathersians flows the Maris and joins the Ister, and from the summits of Hamos flow 3 other great rivers towards the north wind, and fall into it, namely Atlas and Auras and Tibasis. Through Thrace and the Thracian Crabisians flow the rivers Athras and Nos and Artanes, running into the Ister, and from the Paeonians and Mount Rhodope the river Chios, cutting through Hymos in the midst, runs into it also. From the Illyrians the river Angros flows northwards and runs out into the Tribalian plain and into the river Brongos, and the Brongos flows into the Ister. Thus the Ister receives both these, being great rivers. From the region which is above the Ombricans, the river Carpis and another river, the Alpis, flow also towards the north wind and run into it, for the Ister flows in fact through the whole of Europe, beginning in the land of the Keltoi, who after the Kynesians dwell furthest towards the sun-setting of all the peoples of Europe, and thus flowing through all Europe it falls into the sea by the side of Scythia. So then it is because these which have been named and many others join their waters together, that Ister becomes the greatest of rivers, since if we compare the single streams, the Nile is superior in volume of water, for into this no river or spring flows to contribute to its volume. And the Ister flows at an equal level always, both in summer and in winter, for some such cause as this, as I suppose. In winter it is of the natural size, or becomes only a little larger than its nature, seeing that this land receives very little rain in winter, but constantly has snow, whereas in summer the snow which fell in the winter, in quantity abundant, melts and runs from all parts into the Ister. This snow of which I speak, running into the river, helps to swell its volume, and with it also many and violent showers of rain, for it rains during the summer, and thus the waters which mingle with the Ister are more copious in summer than they are in winter, by about as much as the water which the sun draws to himself in summer exceeds that which he draws in winter, and by the setting of these things against one another there is produced a balance, so that the river is seen to be of equal volume always, One, I say, of the rivers which the Scythians have is the Ister, and after it the Tirus, which starts from the north and begins its course from a large lake which is the boundary between the land of the Scythians and that of the Neuroi. At its mouth are settled those Hellenes who are called Tyritai. The third river is the Hypanis, which starts from Scythia and flows from a great lake round which feed white wild horses, and this lake is rightly called Mother of Hypanis. From this then the river Hypanis takes its rise, and for a distance of 5 days' sail it flows shallow and with sweet water still, but from this point on towards the sea for 4 days' sail it is very bitter, for there flows into it the water of a bitter spring, which is so exceedingly bitter that, small as it is, it changes the water of the Hypanis by mingling with it, though that is a river to which few are equal in greatness. This spring is on the border between the lands of the agricultural Scythians and of the Alazonians, and the name of the spring and of the place from which it flows is in Scythian Exampios, and in the Hellenic tongue Hierae Hodoi. Now the Tirus and the Hypanis approach one another in their windings in the land of the Alazonians, but after this each turns off and widens the space between them as they flow. Fourth is the river Borysthenes, which is both the largest of these after the Ister, and also, in our opinion, the most serviceable not only of the Scythian rivers but also of all the rivers of the world besides, excepting only the Nile of Egypt, for to this it is not possible to compare any other river. Of the rest, however, the Borysthenes is the most serviceable, seeing that it provides both pastures which are the fairest and the richest for cattle, and fish which are better by far and more numerous than those of any other river, and also it is the sweetest water to drink, and flows with clear stream, though others beside it are turbid, and along its banks crops are produced better than elsewhere, while in parts where it is not sown, grass grows deeper. Moreover, at its mouth salt forms of itself in abundance, and it produces also huge fish without spines, which they call antokaioi, to be used for salting, and many other things also worthy of wonder. Now, as far as the region of the Gerians, to which it is a voyage of 40 days, the Borysthenes is known as flowing from the north wind, but above this none can tell through what nations it flows. It is certain, however, that it runs through desert to the land of the agricultural Scythians, for these Scythians dwell along its banks for a distance of 10 days' sail. Of this river alone and of the Nile I cannot tell where the sources are, nor, I think, can any of the Hellenes. When the Borysthenes comes near the sea in its course, the Hypanis mingles with it, running out into the same marsh, and the space between these two rivers, which is as it were a beak of land, is called the Point of Hippos, and in it is placed a temple of the Mother, and opposite the temple upon the river Hypanis are settled the Borysthenites. This is that which has to do with these rivers, and after these there is a fifth river besides called Pantocapes. This also flows both from the north and from a lake, and in the space between this river and the Borysthenes dwell the agricultural Scythians. It runs out into the region of Hylaea, and having passed by this it mingles with the Borysthenes. Sixth comes the river Hypercharis, which starts from a lake, and flowing through the midst of the nomad Scythians runs out into the sea by the city of Carchinitis, skirting on its right bank the region of Hylaea and the so-called racecourse of Achilles. Seventh is the Geros, which parts off from the Borysthenes near about that part of the country where the Borysthenes ceases to be known. It parts off, I say, in this region, and has the same name which this region itself has, namely Geros, and as it flows to the sea it borders the country of the nomad and that of the royal Scythians, and runs out into the Hypercharis. The eighth is the river Tanai, which starts in its flow at first from a large lake, and runs out into a still larger lake called Myotis, which is the boundary between the royal Scythians and the Sauromatai. Into this Tanais falls another river, whose name is Hiergis. So many are the rivers of note with which the Scythians are provided, and for cattle the grass which comes up in the land of Scythia is the most productive of bile of any grass which we know, and that this is so you may judge when you open the bodies of the cattle. Thus abundant supply have they of that which is most important. And as for the rest, their customs are as follows. The gods whom they propitiate by worship are these only, Hestia most of all, then Zeus and the earth, supposing that earth is the wife of Zeus, and after these Apollo, and Aphrodite Urania, and Heracles and Ares. Of these all the Scythians have the worship established, and the so-called royal Scythians sacrifice also to Poseidon. Now Hestia is called in Scythian Tabete, and Zeus, being most rightly named in my opinion, is called Papaios, and Earth Api, and Apollo Oitosiros, and Aphrodite Urania is called Argimpasa, and Poseidon Thagimasidus. It is not their custom, however, to make images, altars, or temples to any except Ares, but to him it is their custom to make them. They have all the same manner of sacrifice established for all their religious rites equally, and it is thus performed. The victim stands with its 4 feet tied, and the sacrificing priest stands behind the victim, and by pulling the end of the cord he throws the beast down, and as the victim falls, he calls upon the god to whom he is sacrificing, and then at once throws a noose round its neck, and putting a small stick into it, he turns it round and so strangles the animal without either lighting a fire or making any first offering from the victim or pouring any libation over it. And when he has strangled it and flayed off the skin, he proceeds to boil it. Now, as the land of Scythia is exceedingly ill-wooded, this contrivance has been invented for the boiling of the flesh. Having flayed the victims, they strip the flesh off the bones and then put it into cauldrons, if they happen to have any, of native make, which very much resemble lesbian mixing bowls except that they are much larger. Into these they put the flesh and boil it by lighting under it the bones of the victim. If, however, they have not at hand the cauldron, they put all the flesh into the stomachs of the victims, and adding water they light the bones under them, and these blaze up beautifully, and the stomachs easily hold the flesh when it has been stripped off the bones. Thus an ox is made to boil itself, and the other kinds of victims each boil themselves also. Then when the flesh is boiled, the sacrificer takes a first offering of the flesh and of the vital organs, and casts it in front of him. And they sacrifice various kinds of cattle, but especially horses. To the others of the gods they sacrifice thus and these kinds of beasts, but to Ares as follows. In each district of the several governments they have a temple of Ares set up in this way. Bundles of brushwood are heaped up, for about 3 furlongs in length and in breadth, but less in height, and on the top of this there is a level square made, and 3 of the sides rise sheer, but by the remaining one side the pile may be ascended. Every year they pile on 150 wagon loads of brushwood, for it is constantly settling down by reason of the weather. Upon this pile of which I speak, each people has an ancient iron sword set up, and this is the sacred symbol 65 of Ares. To this sword they bring yearly offerings of cattle and of horses, and they have the following sacrifice in addition, beyond what they make to the other gods. That is to say, of all the enemies whom they take captive in war, they sacrifice 1 man in every 100, not in the same manner as they sacrifice cattle, but in a different manner, for they first pour wine over their heads, and after that they cut the throats of the men, so that the blood runs into a bowl, and then they carry this up to the top of the pile of brushwood, and pour the blood over the sword. This, I say, they carry up, and meanwhile below by the side of the temple they are doing thus. They cut off all the right arms of the slaughtered men with the hands and throw them up into the air, and then when they have finished offering the other victims, they go away, and the arm lies wheresoever it has chanced to fall, and the corpse apart from it. Such are the sacrifices which are established among them. But of swine these make no use, nor indeed are they wont to keep them at all in their land. That which relates to war is thus ordered with them. When a Scythian has slain his first man, he drinks some of his blood, and of all those whom he slays in the battle he bears the heads to the king. For if he has brought a head, he shares in the spoil which they have taken, but otherwise not. And he takes off the skin of the head by cutting it round about the ears, and then taking hold of the scalp and shaking it off. Afterwards he scrapes off the flesh with the rib of an ox, and works the skin about with his hands, and when he has thus tempered it, he keeps it as a napkin to wipe the hands upon, and hangs it from the bridle of the horse on which he himself rides, and takes pride in it, for whosoever has the greatest number of skins to wipe the hands upon, he is judged to be the bravest man. Many also make cloaks to wear of the skins stripped off, sewing them together like shepherds' cloaks of skins. 66. And many take the skin together with the fingernails off the right hands of their enemies when they are dead, and make them into covers for their quivers. Now human skin, it seems, is both thick and glossy in appearance, more brilliantly white than any other skin. Many also take the skins off the whole bodies of men, and stretch them on pieces of wood, and carry them about on their horses. Such are their established customs about these things, and to the skulls themselves, not of all but of their greatest enemies, they do thus. The man saws off all below the eyebrows and clears out the inside, and if he is a poor man, he only stretches ox hide round it and then makes use of it. But if he be rich, besides stretching the ox hide, he gilds it over within and makes use of it as a drinking cup. They do this also if any of their own family have been at variance with them, and the man gets the better of his adversary in trial before the king. And when strangers come to him whom he highly esteems, he sets these skulls before them, and adds the comment that they, being of his own family, had made war against him, and that he had got the better of them. And this they hold to be a proof of manly virtue. Once every year each ruler of a district mixes in his own district a bowl of wine, from which those of the Scythians drink by whom enemies have been slain. But those by whom this has not been done do not taste of the wine, but sit apart dishonored. And this is the greatest of all disgraces among them. But those of them who have slain a very great number of men drink with 2 cups together at the same time. Diviners. There are many among the Scythians, and they divine with a number of willow rods in the following manner. They bring large bundles of rods, and having laid them on the ground, they unroll them, and setting each rod by itself apart, they prophesy. And while speaking thus, they roll the rods together again. And after that they place them in order a second time, one by one. His manner of divination they have from their fathers, but the Inaries or man-women say that Aphrodite gave them the gift of divination, and they divine accordingly with the bark of the linden tree. Having divided the linden bark into 3 strips, the man twists them together in his fingers and untwists them again, and as he does this he utters the oracle. When the king of the Scythians is sick, he sends for 3 of the diviners, namely those who are most in repute, who divine in the manner which has been said, and these say for the most part something like this, namely, that so-and-so has sworn falsely by the hearth of the king, and they name one of the citizens, whosoever it may happen to be. Now it is the prevailing custom of the Scythians to swear by the hearth of the king at the times when they desire to swear the most solemn oath. He then who they say has sworn falsely is brought forthwith, held fast on both sides, and when he has come, the diviners charge him with this, that he is shown by their divination to have sworn falsely by the hearth of the king, and that for this reason the king is suffering pain, and he denies and says that he did not swear falsely, and complains indignantly, and when he denies it, the king sends for other diviners 2 as many in number, and if these also, by looking into their divination, pronounce him guilty of having sworn falsely, at once they cut off the man's head, and the diviners who came first part his goods among them by lot. But if the diviners who came in afterwards acquit him, other diviners come in, and again others after them. If then the greater number acquit the man, the sentence is that the first diviners shall themselves be put to death. They put them to death accordingly in the following manner. First they fill a wagon with brushwood and yoke oxen to it. Then, having bound the feet of the diviners and tied their hands behind them and stopped their mouths with gags, they fasten them down in the middle of the brushwood, and having set fire to it, they scare the oxen and let them go, and often the oxen are burnt to death together with the diviners, and often they escape after being scorched. When the pole to which they are fastened has been burnt, and they burn the diviners in the manner described for other causes also, calling them false prophets. Now when the king puts any to death, he does not leave alive their sons either, but he puts to death all the males, not doing any hurt to the females. In the following manner the Scythians make oaths to whomsoever they make them. They pour wine into a great earthenware cup and mingle with it blood of those who are taking the oath to one another, either making a prick with an awl, or cutting with a dagger a little way into their body. And then they dip into the cup a sword and arrows and a battle-axe and a javelin, and having done this they invoke many curses on the breaker of the oath, and afterwards they drink it off, both they who are making the oath and the most honorable of their company. The burial place of the kings is in the land of the Gerians, the place up to which the Borysthenes is navigable. In this place, when their king has died, they make a large square excavation in the earth, and when they have made this ready, they take up the corpse, the body being covered over with wax, the belly ripped up and cleansed, and then sewn together again, after it has been filled with kyperos cut up, and spices and parsley seed and anise, and they convey it in a wagon to another nation. Then those who receive the corpse thus conveyed to them do the same as the royal Scythians. That is, they cut off a part of their ear and shave their hair round about, and cut themselves all over the arms, and tear their forehead and nose, and pass arrows through their left hand. Thence they convey in the wagon the corpse of the king to another of the nations over whom they rule, and they to whom they came before accompany them, and when they have gone round to all conveying the corpse, then they are in the land of the Gerians, who have their settlements furthest away of all the nations over whom they rule, and they have reached the spot where the burial place is. After that, having placed the corpse in the tomb upon a bed of leaves, they stick spears along on this side and that of the corpse, and stretch pieces of wood over them, and then they cover the place in with matting. Then they strangle and bury in the remaining space of the tomb one of the king's mistresses, his cupbearer, his cook, his horsekeeper, his attendant, and his bearer of messages, and also horses, and a first portion of all things else, and cups of gold, for silver they do not use at all, nor yet bronze. Having thus done, they all join together to pile up a great mound, vying with one another, and zealously endeavoring to make it as large as possible. Afterwards, when the year comes round again, they do as follows. They take the most capable of the remaining servants, and these are native Scythians, for those serve him whom the king himself commands to do so, and his servants are not bought for money. Of these attendants, then they strangle 50, and also 50 of the finest horses, and when they have taken out their bowels and cleansed the belly, they fill it with chaff and sew it together again. Then they set the half of a wheel upon 2 stakes with the hollow side upwards, and the other half of the wheel upon other 2 stakes. And in this manner they fix a number of these, and after this they run thick stakes through the length of the horses, as far as the necks, and they mount them upon the wheels, and the front pieces of wheels support the shoulders of the horses, while those behind bear up their bellies, going by the side of the thighs, and both front and hind legs hang in the air. On the horses they put bridles and bits, and stretch the bridles tight in front of them, and then tie them up to pegs. And of the 50 young men who have been strangled, they mount each one upon his horse, having first run a straight stake through each body along by the spine up to the neck, and a part of this stake projects below, which they fasten into a socket made in the other stake that runs through the horse. Having set horsemen such as I have described in a circle round the tomb, they then ride away. Thus they bury their kings. But as for the other Scythians, when they die, their nearest relations carry them round laid in wagons to their friends in succession, and of them each one, when he receives the body, entertains those who accompany it, and before the corpse they serve up of all things about the same quantity as before the others. Thus private persons are carried about for 40 days, and then they are buried, and after burying them the Scythians cleanse themselves in the following way. They soap their heads and wash them well, and then, for their body, they set up 3 stakes leaning towards one another, and about them they stretch woolen felt coverings, and when they have closed them as much as possible, they throw stones heated red-hot into a basin placed in the middle of the stakes and the felt coverings. Now they have hemp growing in their land, which is very like flax, except in thickness and in height, for in these respects the hemp is much superior. This grows both of itself and with cultivation, and of it the Thracians even make garments, which are very like those made of flaxen thread, so that he who was not specially conversant with it would not be able to decide whether the garments were of flax or of hemp, and he who had not before seen stuff woven of hemp would suppose that the garment was made of flax. The Scythians then take the seed of this hemp and creep under the felt coverings, and then they throw the seed upon the stones which have been heated red hot, and it burns like incense and produces a vapour so thick that no vapour bath in Hellas would surpass it, and the Scythians being delighted with the vapour bath howl like wolves. This is to them instead of washing, for in fact they do not wash their bodies at all in water. Their women, however, pound with a rough stone the wood of the cypress and cedar and frankincense tree, pouring in water with it, and then with this pounded stuff, which is thick, they plaster over all their body and also their face, and not only does a sweet smell attach to them by reason of this, but also when they take off the plaster on the next day, their skin is clean and shining. This nation also is very averse to adopting strange customs, rejecting even those of other tribes among themselves, but especially those of the Hellenes, as the history of Anachasis and also afterwards of Skiles proved. For as to Anachasis first, when he was returning to the abodes of the Scythians after having visited many lands 76 and displayed in them much wisdom, as he sailed through the Hellespont he put into Cyzicus, and since he found the people of Cyzicus celebrating a festival, very magnificently in honor of the mother of the gods, Anachasis vowed to the mother that if he should return safe and sound to his own land, he would both sacrifice to her with the same rites as he saw the men of Cyzicus do, and also hold a night festival. So when he came to Scythia, he went down into the region called Hylaea. This is along by the side of the racecourse of Achilles, and is quite full, as it happens, of trees of all kinds. Into this, I say, Anachasis went down, and proceeded to perform all the ceremonies of the festival in honor of the goddess, with a kettle drum, and with images hung about himself. And one of the Scythians perceived him doing this, and declared it to Solios the king, and the king came himself also, and when he saw Anachasis doing this, he shot him with an arrow and killed him. Accordingly, at the present time, if one asks about Anachasis, the Scythians say that they do not know him, and for this reason, because he went out of his own country to Hellas and adopted foreign customs. And as I heard from Timnes, the steward of Areopagus, he was the uncle on the father's side of Edanthiasos, king of the Scythians, and the son of Neuros, the son of Lycos, the son of Spargapetes. If then Anachasis was of this house, let him know that he died by the hand of his brother. For Edanthiasos was the son of Solios, and Solios was he who killed Anachasis. However, I have heard also another story told by the Peloponnesians, that Anachasis was sent out by the king of the Scythians, and so made himself a disciple of Hellas, and that when he returned back he said to him that had sent him forth, that the Hellenes were all busied about every kind of cleverness except the Lacedaemonians, but these alone knew how to exchange speech sensibly. This story, however, has been invented without any ground by the Hellenes themselves, and however that may be, the man was slain in the way that was related above. This man then fared thus badly by reason of foreign customs and communication with Hellenes. And very many years afterwards, Skiles, the son of Areopagus, suffered nearly the same fate as he. For Areopagus, the king of the Scythians with other sons, had Skiles born to him, and he was born of a woman who was of Istria, and certainly not a native of Scythia. And this mother taught him the language and letters of Hellas. Afterwards, in course of time, Areopagus was brought to his end by treachery at the hands of Spargapetes, the king of the Agathyrsians, and Skiles succeeded to the kingdom, and he took not only that but also the wife of his father, whose name was Opoia. This Opoia was a native Scythian, and from her was born Oricos to Areopagus. Now, when Skiles was king of the Scythians, he was by no means satisfied with the Scythian manner of life, but was much more inclined towards Hellenic ways because of the training with which he had been brought up, and he used to do somewhat as follows. When he came with the Scythians in arms to the city of the Borysthenites. Now these Borysthenites say that they are of Miletos. When Skiles came to these, he would leave his band in the suburbs of the city and go himself within the walls and close the gates. After that he would lay aside his Scythian equipments and take Hellenic garments, and wearing them he would go about in the marketplace with no guards or any other man accompanying him, and they watched the gates, meanwhile, that none of the Scythians might see him wearing this dress. And while in other respects too he adopted Hellenic manners of life, he used also to perform worship to the gods according to the customs of the Hellenes. Then, having stayed a month or more than that, he would put on the Scythian dress and depart. This he did many times, and he both built for himself a house in Borysthenes and also took to it a woman of the place as his wife. Since, however, it was fated that evil should happen to him, it happened by an occasion of this kind. He formed a desire to be initiated in the rites of Bacchus Dionysos, and as he was just about to receive the initiation, there happened a very great portent. He had in the city of the Borysthenites a house of great size and built with large expense, of which also I made mention a little before this, and round it were placed sphinxes and griffins of white stone. On this house Zeus caused a bolt to fall, and the house was altogether burnt down, but Skiles none the less for this completed his initiation. Now the Scythians make the rites of Bacchus a reproach against the Hellenes, for they say that it is not fitting to invent a god like this, who impels men to frenzy. So when Skiles had been initiated into the rites of Bacchus, one of the Borysthenites went off to the Scythians and said, "Whereas ye laugh at us, O Scythians, because we perform the rite of Bacchus, and because the god seizes us, now this divinity has seized also your king, and he is both joining in the rite of Bacchus and maddened by the influence of the god. And if ye disbelieve me, follow, and I will show you." The chief men of the Scythians followed him, and the Borysthenite led them secretly into the town, and set them upon a tower. So when Skiles passed by with the company of revellers, and the Scythians saw him joining in the rite of Bacchus, they were exceedingly grieved at it, and they went out and declared to the whole band that which they had seen. After this, when Skiles was riding out again to his own abode, the Scythians took his brother Octomesades for their leader, who was a son of the daughter of Teres, and made insurrection against Skiles. He then, when he perceived that which was being done to his hurt, and for what reason it was being done, fled for refuge to Thrace, and Octomesades, being informed of this, proceeded to march upon Thrace. So when he had arrived at the river Ister, the Thracians met him, and as they were about to engage battle, Scythox sent a messenger to Octomesades and said, "Why must we make trial of one another in fight? Thou art my sister's son, and thou hast in thy power my brother. Do thou give him back to me, and I will deliver to thee thy brother Skiles, and let us not either of us set our armies in peril either, thou or I." Thus Scythox proposed to him by a herald, for there was with Octomesades a brother of Scythox, who had gone into exile for fear of him. And Octomesades agreed to this, and by giving up his own mother's brother to Scythox, he received his brother Skiles in exchange. And Scythox, when he received his brother, led him away as a prisoner, but Octomesades cut off the head of Skiles there upon the spot. Thus do the Scythians carefully guard their own customary observances, and such are the penalties which they inflict upon those who acquire foreign customs besides their own. How many the Scythians are I was not able to ascertain precisely, but I heard various reports of the number, for reports say both that they are very many in number and also that they are few, at least as regards the true Scythians. Thus far, however, they gave me evidence of my own eyesight. There is between the river Borysthenes and the Hypanis a place called Exampios, of which also I made mention somewhat before this, saying that there was in it a spring of bitter water, from which the water flows and makes the river Hypanis unfit to drink. In this place there is set a bronze bowl, in size at least 6 times as large as the mixing bowl at the entrance of the Pontus, which Pausanias, the son of Cleombrotus, dedicated. And for him who has never seen that, I will make the matter clear by saying that the bowl in Scythia holds easily 600 amphors, and the thickness of this Scythian bowl is 6 fingers. This then the natives of the place told me had been made of arrowheads, for their king, they said, whose name was Ariantes, wishing to know how many the Scythians were, ordered all the Scythians to bring 1 arrowhead, each from his own arrow, and whosoever should not bring one, he threatened with death. So a great multitude of arrowheads was brought, and he resolved to make of them a memorial, and to leave it behind him. From these then, they said, he made this bronze bowl, and dedicated it in this place, Exampios. This is what I heard about the number of the Scythians. Now this land has no marvelous things, except that it has rivers which are by far larger and more numerous than those of any other land. One thing, however, shall be mentioned which it has to show, and which is worthy of wonder even besides the rivers and the greatness of the plain, that is to say, they point outer footprint of Heracles in the rock by the bank of the river Tirus, which in shape is like the mark of a man's foot, but in size is 2 cubits long. This then is such as I have said, and I will go back now to the history which I was about to tell at first. While Darius was preparing to go against the Scythians, and was sending messengers to appoint to some the furnishing of a land army, to others that of ships, and to others the bridging over of the Thracian Bosphorus, Artabanos, the son of Hystaspes and brother of Darius, urged him by no means to make the march against the Scythians, telling him how difficult the Scythians were to deal with. Since, however, he did not persuade him, though he gave him good counsel, he ceased to urge, and Darius, when all his preparations had been made, began to march his army forth from Susa. Then one of the Persians, Oiobazos, made request to Darius that, as he had 3 sons and all were serving in the expedition, one might be left behind for him, and Darius said that as he was a friend and made a reasonable request, he would leave behind all the sons. So Oiobazos was greatly rejoiced, supposing that his sons had been freed from service, but Darius commanded those who had the charge of such things to put to death all the sons of Oiobazos. These then were left, having been slain upon the spot where they were, and Darius meanwhile set forth from Susa and arrived at the place on the Bosphorus where the bridge of ships had been made, in the territory of Chalcedon, and there he embarked in a ship and sailed to the so-called Chionian rocks, which the Hellenes say formerly moved backwards and forwards, and taking his seat at the temple he gazed upon the Pontus, which is a sight well worth seeing. Of all seas indeed it is the most marvelous in its nature. The length of it is 11,100 furlongs, and the breadth, where it is broadest, 3,300. And of this great sea the mouth is but 4 furlongs broad, and the length of the mouth, that is of the neck of water which is called Bosphorus, where, as I said, the bridge of ships had been made, is not less than 120 furlongs. This Bosphorus extends to the Propontis, and the Propontis, being in breadth 500 furlongs and in length 1,400, has its outlet into the Hellespont, which is but 7 furlongs broad at the narrowest place, though it is 400 furlongs in length, and the Hellespont runs out into that expansive sea which is called the Aegean. These measurements I have made as follows. A ship completes on an average in a long day a distance of 70,000 fathoms, and in a night 60,000. Now we know that to the river phases from the mouth of the sea, for it is here that the Pontus is longest, is a voyage of 9 days and 8 nights, which amounts to 111 myriads of fathoms, and these fathoms are 11,100 furlongs. Then from the land of the Scythians to Themyscira on the river Thermodon, for here is the broadest part of the Pontus, it is a voyage of 3 days and 2 nights, which amounts to 33 myriads 86 of fathoms, or 3,300 furlongs. This Pontus then, and also the Bosphorus and the Hellespont, have been measured by me thus, and their nature is such as has been said, and this Pontus also has a lake which has its outlet into it, which lake is not much less in size than the Pontus itself, and it is called Myotis, and mother of the Pontus. Darius then, having gazed upon the Pontus, sailed back to the bridge, of which Mandrocles a Samian had been chief constructor, and having gazed upon the Bosphorus also, he set up 2 pillars by it of white stone with characters cut upon them, on the one Assyrian, and on the other Hellenic, being the names of all the nations which he was leading with him, and he was leading with him all over whom he was ruler. The whole number of them without the naval force was reckoned to be 70 myriads 87, including cavalry, and ships had been gathered together to the number of 600. These pillars the Byzantines conveyed to their city after the events of which I speak, and used them for the altar of Artemis Orthosia, excepting 1 stone, which was left standing by the side of the temple of Dionysos in Byzantium, covered over with Assyrian characters. Now the place on the Bosphorus where Darius made his bridge is, as I conclude, midway between Byzantium and the temple at the mouth of the Pontus. After this, Darius, being pleased with the floating bridge, rewarded the chief constructor of it, Mandrocles the Samian, with gifts tenfold, 88, and as an offering from these Mandrocles had a painting made of figures to present the whole scene of the bridge over the Bosphorus, and King Darius sitting in a prominent seat and his army crossing over, This he caused to be painted and dedicated it as an offering in the temple of Hera, with the following inscription: Bosphorus having bridged over, the straits fish abounding, to Hera Mandrocles dedicates this of his work to record, a crown on himself he set, and he brought to the Samians glory, and for Darius performed everything after his mind. This memorial was made of him who constructed the bridge, and Darius, after he had rewarded Mandrocles with gifts, passed over into Europe, having first commanded the Ionians to sail into the Pontus as far as the river Ister, and when they arrived at the Ister, there to wait for him, making a bridge meanwhile over the river, for the chief of his naval force were the Ionians, the Aeolians and the Hellespontians. So the fleet sailed through between the Chionian rocks and made straight for the Ister, and then they sailed up the river a 2 days' voyage from the sea and proceeded to make a bridge across the neck, as it were, of the river, where the mouths of the Ister part off. Darius, meanwhile, having crossed the Bosphorus on the floating bridge, was advancing through Thrace, and when he came to the sources of the river Taeros, he encamped for 3 days. Now the Taeros is said by those who dwell near it to be the best of all rivers, both in other respects which tend to healing, and especially for curing diseases of the skin, 89 both in men and in horses, and its springs are 38 in number, flowing all from the same rock, of which some are cold and others warm. The way to them is of equal length from the city of Heraion near Perinthos, and from Apollonia upon the Euxine Sea, that is to say 2 days' journey by each road. This Taeros runs into the river Contadesdos, and the Contadesdos into the Agrianes, and the Agrianes into the Hebros, which flows into the sea by the city of Aenos. Darius then, having come to this river, and having encamped there, was pleased with the river, and set up a pillar there also, with an inscription as follows: The head springs of the river Taeros give the best and fairest water of all rivers, and to them came leading an army against the Scythians, the best and fairest of all men, Darius the son of Hystaspes, of the Persians, and of all the continent king. These were the words which were there written. Darius then set out from thence, and came to another river, whose name is Artescos, which flows through the land of the Odrysians. Having come to this river, he did as follows: he appointed a place for his army, and bade every man as he passed out by it place 1 stone in this appointed place, and when the army had performed this, then he marched away his army, leaving behind great mounds of these stones. But before he came to the Ister, he conquered first the Getae, who believe in immortality, for the Thracians who occupy Salmydessos and are settled above the cities of Apollonian and Messambria, called the Kyrmianae 90, and the Nipsaioi delivered themselves over to Darius without fighting. But the Getae, who are the bravest and the most upright in their dealings of all the Thracians, having betaken themselves to obstinacy, were forthwith subdued. And their belief in immortality is of this kind, that is to say, they hold that they do not die, but that he who is killed goes to Salmoxis, a divinity, whom some of them call Gebeleses, and at intervals of 4 years they send one of themselves, whomsoever the lot may select, as a messenger to Salmoxis, charging him with such requests as they have to make on each occasion. And they send him thus. Certain of them who are appointed for this have 3 javelins, and others meanwhile take hold on both sides of him who is being sent to Salmoxis, both by his hands and his feet, and first they swing him up, then throw him into the air so as to fall upon the spear points, and if when he is pierced through he is killed, they think that the god is favorable to them, but if he is not killed, they find fault with the messenger himself, calling him a worthless man, and then, having found fault with him, they send another, and they give him the charge beforehand, while he is yet alive. These same Thracians also shoot arrows up towards the sky when thunder and lightning come, and use threats to the god, not believing that there exists any other god except their own. This Salmoxis, I hear from the Hellenes who dwell about the Hellespont and the Pontus, was a man, and he became a slave in Samos, and was in fact a slave of Pythagoras, the son of Menisarchos. Then, having become free, he gained great wealth, and afterwards returned to his own land. And as the Thracians both live hardly and are rather simple-minded, this Salmoxis, being acquainted with the Ionian way of living and with manners more cultivated than the Thracians were used to see, since he had associated with Hellenes, and not only that, but with Pythagoras, not the least able philosopher of the Hellenes, prepared a banqueting hall, where he received and feasted the chief men of the tribe, and instructed them meanwhile that neither he himself nor his guests nor their descendants in succession after them would die, but that they would come to a place where they would live forever and have all things good. While he was doing that which has been mentioned and was saying these things, he was making for himself meanwhile a chamber under the ground. And when his chamber was finished, he disappeared from among the Thracians and went down into the underground chamber, where he continued to live for 3 years. And they grieved for his loss and mourned for him as dead. Then in the 4th year he appeared to the Thracians, and in this way the things which Samoxis said became credible to them. Thus they say that he did, but as to this matter and the chamber underground, I neither disbelieve it nor do I very strongly believe, but I think that this Samoxis lived many years before Pythagoras. However, whether there ever lived a man Samoxis, or whether he is simply a native deity of the Getae, let us bid farewell to him now. These, I say, having such manners as I have said, were subdued by the Persians and accompanied the rest of the army. And when Darius and with him the land army arrived at the Ister, then after all had passed over, Darius commanded the Ionians to break up the floating bridge and to accompany him by land, as well as the rest of the troops which were in the ships. And when the Ionians were just about to break it up and to do that which he commanded, Cos, the son of Erxander, who was commander of the Mytileneans, said thus to Darius, having first inquired whether he was disposed to listen to an opinion from one who desired to declare it, O king, seeing that thou art about to march upon a land where no cultivated ground will be seen nor any inhabited town, do thou therefore let this bridge remain where it is, leaving to guard it those same men who constructed it. Then, if we find the Scythians and fare as we desire, we have a way of return, and also even if we shall not be able to find them, at least our way of return is secured, for that we should be worsted by the Scythians in fight I never feared yet, but rather that we might not be able to find them, and might suffer some disaster in wandering about. Perhaps someone will say that in speaking thus I am speaking for my own advantage, in order that I may remain behind, but in truth, I am bringing forward, O king, the opinion which I found best for thee, and I myself will accompany thee and not be left behind. With this opinion Darius was very greatly pleased and made answer to him in these words, Friend from Lesbos, when I have returned safe to my house, be sure that thou appear before me, in order that I may requite thee with good deeds for good counsel. Having thus said, and having tied 60 knots in a thong, he called the despots of the Ionians to speak with him, and said as follows, Men of Ionia, know that I have given up the opinion which I formerly declared with regard to the bridge, and do ye keep this thong, and do as I shall say. So soon as ye shall have seen me go forward against the Scythians, from that time begin, and untie a knot on each day. And, if within this time I am not here, and ye find that the days marked by the knots have passed by, then sail away to your own lands. Till then, since our resolve has thus been changed, guard the floating bridge, showing all diligence to keep it safe and to guard it, and thus acting, ye will do for me a very acceptable service. Thus said Darius, and hastened on his march forwards. Now in front of Scythia, in the direction towards the sea 97 lies Thrace, and where a bay is formed in this land, there begins Scythia, into which the Ister flows out, the mouth of the river being turned towards the southeast wind. Beginning at the Ister, then, I am about to describe the coastland of the true Scythia with regard to measurement. At once from the Ister begins this original land of Scythia, and it lies towards the midday and the south wind, extending as far as the city called Carchanitis. After this, the part which lies on the coast of the same sea still, a country which is mountainous and runs out in the direction of the Pontus, is occupied by the Tauric race as far as the peninsula which is called the rugged Chersonese, and this extends to the sea which lies towards the east wind. For 2 sides of the Scythian boundaries lie along by the sea, one by the sea on the south, and the other by that on the east, just as it is with Attica, and in truth the Tauroi occupy a part of Scythia which has much resemblance to Attica. It is as if in Attica another race and not the Athenians occupied the hill region of Sunion, supposing it to project more at the point into the sea, that region namely which is cut off by a line from Thorikos to Anaphlistos. Such I say, if we may be allowed to compare small things such as this with great, is the form of the Tauric land. For him, however, who has not sailed along this part of the coast of Attica, I will make it clear by another comparison. It is as if in Iapygia another race, and not the Iapygians, had cut off for themselves, and were holding that extremity of the land which is bounded by a line beginning at the harbour of Brentition and running to Taurus. And in mentioning these two similar cases, I am suggesting many other things also, to which the Tauric land has resemblance, 100%. After the Tauric land immediately come Scythians again, occupying the parts above the Tauroi and the coasts of the eastern sea, that is to say, the parts to the west of the Cimmerian Bosphorus and of the Myosian lake, as far as the river Tanais, which runs into the corner of this lake. In the upper parts which tend inland, Scythia is bounded, as we know, 100, by the Agathyrsians first, beginning from the Ister, and then by the Neuroi, afterwards by the Androphagoi, and lastly by the Melanchlonoi.